Hey, Freakies! I hope you're all doing well. I thought I would take a moment to record a small lecture for you on critical analysis. This is because sometimes people can get a bit stumped on critical analysis and how it works. I've already given you a little bit of a video to think about critical thinking. That's a bit weird, but anyway, think about critical thinking and to get you in the headspace of what critical thinking requires and all of those things. Because critical thinking is connected with critical analysis and you need to be able to draw on those skills when you're doing your analytical work. I know it's kind of making things a little more obvious this way, but whatever helps might help you get a better work in your assignment overall. Now, the best way to start talking about critical analysis is to talk very briefly about what we mean by a critical thinker, because they are directly linked. Being a critical thinker means to have a whole range of different types of characteristics. Number one off the top of the list has to be inquisitiveness, with regards to a whole range of different types of issues. And most importantly, if you're looking at one issue, looking at it from a range of different perspectives. A critical thinker genuinely has a concern where they want to become well informed and continually be well informed. Being alert to opportunities where it's possible to use critical thinking. If someone's trying to sell you a specific perspective, what happens with the other perspective? And how can you think about it from both sides of the coin? Or if there are a range of perspectives, how can you make sure you've considered all of those perspectives about that one issue? Self-confidence in a person's ability to reason and think logically about different things is very important. You must have confidence in yourself to be able to think in a range of different ways about certain types of issues. Open-mindedness about divergent views is really important too. You can't sit there and be a critical thinker if you're not willing to listen to or understand the perspectives of other people. It is absolutely vital. Recently, we've been going through the marriage equality debate, right? Everybody's talking about marriage equality, and I'm quite frankly sick of hearing about it. But it's a good example of where it's important for us to take into consideration other people's opinions. So even though someone might not agree with the perspective that you have, that doesn't mean that you can sit there and tell them that they're stupid or that they're dumb or that they're misinformed or that they're an ignorant twat. You need to think and make sure that you consider all of their ideas and opinions from their perspective, even if it doesn't align with yours. That's what makes you a good critical thinker. So flexibility in considering alternatives and options is very important, and understanding the opinions of other people without being, rude or nasty or just telling them they're an ignorant twat. Making sure that you're being fair-minded in the way that you're appraising situations and the way that people are thinking about things, and being honest in the face of your own biases about particular things. Your own prejudices, stereotypes, perhaps even egocentric tendencies. So being honest about your own bias is extremely important in different ways of being critical thinkers. Trying to suspend making or altering judgments, right? Suspending judgments is absolutely crucial. So before you make judgments about that person who appears to be blind, rotten drunk when they're walking around in a public space, you need to suspend that judgment and you need to go and assess the situation more thoroughly. You may well find that that person is blind, rotten drunk and that they need some assistance. Again, continue to suspend that judgment and help that person so they get the assistance that they need, instead of calling them names or whatever else might be a different way of approaching it, or losing their temper with them, your temper with them or whatever. Suspending judgment is really important. It also means that you don't misinterpret the situation. That person might look drunk, they actually may not be. They may have an intellectual impairment, which is impacting on their capacity to walk and to create words and so forth. So suspending judgment is really important work that police officers need to engage in. And most importantly, a willingness to reconsider and revise your views where honest reflection suggests that change is warranted. All of these things relate to critical analysis, and they're very important parts of the process. You can even apply this to the work that you'll be doing with your assignment, where you're critically assessing the research that you're reading for your assessment item. Have a look at the approach, the author, the audience that person is aiming for, the author's methods that they've used, the credibility of the source overall, and the evidence that they're using to support their points. All of these things will get you thinking in a more robust way about whether or not these sources are good for your assignment. Critical analysis is ultimately about finding evidence to support or refute your approaches that you're reading about. It does not necessarily mean that it's negative. And I think the critical thinking video that I gave you also points this out. Critical does not mean negative. Critical means that you're looking at this problem or issue and that you have your evidence over here. What does the evidence say? Does it support the perspective around this problem or issue? That is critical. So you may well have this thing over here. I like to use examples, so I'm going to say, we've got the example of youth justice conferencing over here, right? It's your job to do a critical analysis of youth justice conferencing. So you go to the research evidence. The research evidence says that for the most part, youth justice conferences are quite effective. In some circumstances, so maybe about between 80 and 90% of the time, they're effective. In between about 20 to 10% of the time, they're ineffective for a range of different reasons. That tells you that overall, the research literature is supporting, so I think I got that wrong. The research literature is supporting the idea that youth justice conferencing is evidence-based. So that is still a critical analysis because you're bringing the evidence to bear on the thing or on the process or on the policy. I hope that makes sense. Critical writing is absolutely key in this process, and I will talk you through that a little bit based on a website that I've got in the slides that I've put together for this presentation. But before I move on, I want to talk about an example of where evidence doesn't support something that has been put into place. So another example that I can talk you through is boot camps in Queensland. Now, the LNP government at the time implemented boot camps. They wanted boot camps for young people and they got rid of a whole other bunch of supportive stuff which the evidence-based told us worked. I'm not going to go into that because then I'll be getting opinionative and not critically thinking. So we've got boot camps over here. Then we have a whole range of evidence over here about boot camps which tells us that they are they can be profoundly harmful for young people and that they're not effective. They're effective in situ, but as soon as the young person leaves, then everything falls down again and they go back to reoffending and so forth. So even though we have a whole research base over here that says that they're completely ineffective, they still went ahead and implemented boot camps. Now that is not what we would call critical thinking, and it is most certainly not evidence-based practice. So if you were doing a critical analysis of the boot camps policy in Queensland, you've got a raft of evidence which supports that boot camps should not be in place. So that's what we mean by a critical analysis, is actually looking at the thing, weighing up the evidence and whether or not it fits with the approach that they're using. I hope that makes sense a little bit more. It takes a bit of time to talk through these examples, but I find them extremely helpful. And I do hope that it's helping you to think about it. So what is this thing called critical writing then? It's a clear and confident refusal to accept the conclusions of other writers without evaluating the arguments and evidence that they provide. a balanced presentation of why the conclusions of other writers may be accepted or may need to be treated with caution. It's a presentation of your own evidence, an argument leading to your conclusion, and a recognition of the limitations in your own evidence, argument, and conclusion. Now, this all sounds a little bit airy-fairy, but there's a key way that I like to demonstrate how this looks and how this works. And that's demonstrating the differences between descriptive writing and critically analytical writing. Okay, so this is a little bit airy-fairy about what critical writing is, but when we have a look at what descriptive writing is, it then tells us how we need to work, step up our writing in a particular way. And of course, this can apply to any particular type of writing. It can be in a PowerPoint presentation, it can be in a presentation you need to give to class, it can be in an essay. Descriptive writing this is where you describe something but you don't go beyond an account of what appears to be there. A certain amount of descriptive writing is needed in any type of work that you do. So for instance, you need evidence in your paragraphs. You might describe your evidence in your paragraph, which is a particular research project that you've read in a journal article. So you need setting of the research, general description of a piece of literature or art or something like that, a list of measurements that have been taken, percentages about what's talking about in terms of, this number of people said this number of people said that, the timing of the research. You might be giving an account of some sort of details of a program or something, or a brief summary of a history that's leading up to an event or a decision. So this is what descriptive writing is. And there are significant differences between this and critical writing. Descriptive writing doesn't develop an argument. It represents the situation as it stands. It's often very simple. It can use many, many words in your word limit. So be wary of description. And of course, it's reporting ideas but not taking them forward in any way. Assignments using descriptive writing would therefore gain few marks, and often it'll just get you a pass. Critical writing, however, is different because it engages and participates in the academic debate. And I know that's something you don't necessarily want to do because it's not a world of fun, but it is something that's very important. Particularly if you get to the upper echelons of policing work, you need to be able to engage in those debates in a thoughtful manner and provide evidence to support your points. This is absolutely crucial to why we are teaching you these skills. Critical writing weighs up the quality of the evidence and the argument that you have read. So if you've got all of that evidence there saying that boot camps are not good, then clearly your argument is going to be that boot camps are not good and they should get rid of them. Critical writing also identifies the key positive and negative aspects that you can comment upon, and making sure that you show both sides of the research when you're doing this. Assesses the relevance and usefulness of that information to the debate that you're engaging in, and identifies how they can be best woven into the argument that you're developing. Okay? This obviously requires a much higher level of skill for critical writing than descriptive writing, and this of course is reflected in the higher marks given. So clearly critical writing requires a higher level of skill than for descriptive writing. And of course, this is reflected in the higher marks that you're given. So if you want to get higher marks, you need to demonstrate this in your assessment work. It's also about developing your own academic voice. And Wellington offers some really useful suggestions for distinguishing between an academic and a non-academic voice. You have a healthy skepticism, but not cynicism. That can be considered opinionative. You have a confidence, but not a cockiness or arrogant. Well, it's clear that every policing organisation is doing the right thing. That's also a generalisation. Judgment, which is critical, but gives evidence when you're being critical, but it's not dismissive completely. It seems to be a good approach, but we've got all of this evidence that suggests that perhaps it's not. It presents ideas and opinions, but it does so without being opinionative. and it actually includes evidence to support those opinions or ideas. So clearly, if you've got your essay and it shows that boot camps are not good, then that's not an opinion. That's your argument in this case, but it's not an opinion because the evidence supports your ideas. It's a careful evaluation of published work rather than a serial shooting at random targets. Interpret that how you see fit. It's about being fair, assessing fairly the strengths and weaknesses of other people's ideas in writing, and doing this without prejudice. And of course, making judgments on the basis of considerable thought and all the available evidence, as opposed to making assertions without reason. Right, paragraphing is key to critical writing, and I talk to people about the style of paragraphing that I call PEEL. It's PEEL, point, evidence, explanation, link. Okay? As you make your point in your first couple of sentences, then you have your evidence to back that up. Then you explain how the evidence supports your point, and then you link back to your overall argument or your overall point in the paragraph. So to make sure that you're including your critical writing as opposed to your descriptive writing, then you'll often do things like introduce your main point, which again fits with that PEEL structure. You make your point with your supporting evidence, and then you critically reflect on that point overall. This is what gives you critical writing. When you get assignment feedback that says that your work is not very critical and it's quite descriptive, you'll have the first thing where you've introduced the point, or your P in your PEEL structure. Then you'll have making the point with your supportive evidence, which is your E in your PEEL structure. But then the other two fall off. So it's just P, it's not PEEL. Your explanation and your link will be missing in that formula. So make sure you're thinking about how you're doing that when you're doing that stuff. A useful habit to get into is to make sure that if you describe some evidence relevant to your argument, you then need to explain to the reader why it is relevant. The logic of your explanation contributes to the critical component of your writing. If that part is not there, then it's technically just descriptive work. So a sentence or two that might describe and reference the evidence, but this is not enough in itself. The next few sentences need to make sure that you make the contribution of that evidence clear in what you are saying. You should not simply assume that the reader will be able to follow your thinking pattern. You need to tell them. They can sometimes be dumb, those readers. So bring them back in. Say, this is the evidence that says boot camps are not effective. Clearly then, this policy is not grounded in an evidence-based approach. There's your link. That links back to your overall point. And so it's a little bit clearer. I've given you an example of good critical writing. They refer to the available evidence, but it also evaluates the validity of that evidence and assesses what contribution it can realistically make to the debate. So I've put that in the slides for you, just so that you can see a good example of what that might look like. Anyway, that summarises my discussion of critical analysis. I'm sorry if it was boring. I really sincerely hope, though, that it was helpful for you. That's it for now. Have a great day, folks, and I'll see you all soon. Laters!